I'm just reading this, The Story of the Irish Race by Seamus MacManus. It's a solid book. And he's great references in it because he gives them current to their time. Like, so if you're speaking about the 1500s, he gives quotes of some of the political people and stuff that would have written down their thoughts and stuff of that era. And one of them is a Campion, that's his name. And he says, quote, he's speaking about the English people who would have come over to Ireland and blended a little bit with the Irish people. So he's speaking about what happens to them from his own perspective anyway, from the English perspective. So he says, quote, the very English of birth, complains Campion, conversant with the brutish sort of that people, the Irish, become degenerate in short space and quite altered into the first rank of Irish rogues. So Campion continues, he says, the Irish speak Latin like a vulgar tongue, learned in their common schools of leechcraft and law, whereat they begin children and hold on 16 or 20 years, conning by rote the aphorisms of Hippocrates and the civil institutions. So these are switched on people, they're smart people, okay, they're conversant with Latin, or in Latin even. Now he makes a further observation on the Irish people, and it's interesting to see what, I suppose, those who viewed themselves as above the Irish people at the time, this is the 1570s. So what are we looking at? Nearly 500 years ago. And he says, quote, he's talking about the Irish people. The people are thus inclined, religious, frank, amorous, ireful, sufferable of pains infinite, very glorious, great givers, passing in hospitality. The lewder sort are sensual, but reformed, are such mirrors of holiness and austerity that other nations retain but a shew or shadow of devotion in comparison to them. Abstinence and fasting is to them a familiar kind of chastisement. They are sharp-witted, lovers of learning, capable of any study whereunto they bend themselves, constant in travel, adventurous, intractable, kind-hearted, and secret in displeasure. Fascinating stuff, and a lot of that still holds today. Because I think we're caught in such a lull now, where any sort of distinguishing characteristic is neutralised for the sake of holding on or retaining the belief that all people are as equally equal as equal will allow. Okay? So to hear such things like that from somebody who would see themselves in opposition or in counter-distinction to the Irish people is fascinating. So he wanted to see himself as being above the Irish people, and he wrote so as well. But the virtues that were identifiable in the Irish people 500 years ago must have been so prominent that he could not but write about them. Okay? And I like that, not just so much that quote, but I like hearing quotes from, or opinions or views from people of the time. And I think this book, the Story of the Irish Race, it's a solid book. I think it is, I don't know, this current copy was printed in the 70s, but I think it's the 22nd edition or something, so God knows where it is. Early 20th century anyway, because he speaks of, if not the Civil War, then certainly the Rising. Yeah, the Easter Rising stuff. So he kind of finishes up the book around then. But an interesting book, solid book, and sad as well. Sad as well, because, hang on now, if I can find the page, I'll go into it. So he gives, what's lovely about it as well is he gives poems of the time. And I will try and read one now if I can get my hands on it quick, sharp, because it's an interesting one. Because what the poem is describing is a meeting between Irish people and the English people who had come over. Okay, so yes, so he's talking about he's talking about the massacre of 1641, where the Irish are said to have killed tens of thousands of Protestants. Okay, he gives examples and again quotes or references from the time that he's talking about to show that this couldn't have been the case. Okay, so Brian Boy McGee is the name of the poem, and I'll read it now. Yeah, so he's talking about this guy. I'll read it. The Scottish troops and Scottish planters are, on the other hand, accused by the Irish of sallying out from Carrickfergus and driving Irish women and children, variously estimated at 1,000 and at several thousand, to dreadful death over the fearful Goblins cliffs on the peninsula called Island McGee. And there's a poem written about it, and I'll read that. So, I continue. I am Brian Boy McGee. My father was Owen Bawn. I was wakened from happy dreams by the shouts of my startled clan, and I saw through the leaping glare that marked where our homestead stood, my mother swing by her hair, and my brothers lie in their blood. In the creepy cold of the night, the pitiless wolves came down, Scotch troops from the castle grim, guarding Knockfergus town, and they hacked and lashed and hewed, with musket and rope and sword, till my murdered kin lay thick in pools by the slaughtered ford. I fought by my father's side, and when we were fighting sore, we saw a line of their steel with our shrieking women before. The redcoats drove them on to the verge of the Goblins grey, hurried them, God, the sight, as the sea foamed up for its prey. Oh, tall were the Goblins cliffs, and sharp were the rocks, my woe, and tender the limbs that met such terrible death below. Mother and babe and maid they clutched at the empty air, with eyeballs widened in fright, that hour of despair. Sleep soft in your heaving bed, O little fair love of my heart. The bitter oath I have sworn shall be of my life a part, and for every piteous prayer you prayed on your way to die, may I hear an enemy plead while I laugh and deny. In the dawn that was golden red, I, red as the blood-choked stream, I crept to the perilous brink, great Christ, was the night a dream? In all the island of gloom I only had life that day, death covered the green hillsides and tossed in the bay. I have vowed by the pride of my sires, by my mother's wandering ghost, by my kinfolk's shattered bones hurled on the cruel coast, by the sweet dead face of my love, and the wound in her gentle breast, to follow that murderous band, a sleuth-hound that knows no rest. I shall go to Phelim O'Neill with my sorrowful tale, and crave a bright blue blade of Spain in the ranks of his soldiers brave, and God grant me the strength to wield that shining avenger well, when the gale shall sweep his foe through the yawning gates of hell. I am Brian Boy McGee, and my creed is a creed of hate. Love, peace I have cast aside, but vengeance, vengeance I wait, till I pay back the fourfold debt for the horrors I witnessed there, when my brothers moaned in their blood, and my mother swung by her hair. There's a reading in history of details and events that fail. Words fail us more than we care to admit, okay? But reading first-hand accounts or poems that are kind of current to the event, they kind of bring it home a little bit more than just so many people were killed, okay? Interesting ones.